wanted to kind of minimize his reps in an effort to get more productivity. You know, we just trying to rep manage in terms of the totality. He wasn't less of a focal point, but we did want to cut his reps a little bit in an effort to get higher quality play.
Something incredibly strange is going on for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the reason why it's so strange is because the team is winning and the individual we're making this video on is actually in the midst of a career year, yet his meltdown doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So before we get to the content, we are on the grind to 1 million subscribers. We're less than 50,000 subscribers away from getting there, so make sure you subscribe and turn on our notifications to help us get to that milestone. And now that we got all that out of the way, work! We made over $1,000 playing Prize Picks over the past week. We hit on Thursday night and on Sunday, and I would have hit a third time if Aaron Jones didn't get injured. Fortunately, Prize Picks refunds you when a player gets injured. I give away my picks for free on Instagram and now on Snapchat. And make sure you use my promo code Mikerophone to get a free $50 when you make a lineup of $5 or more. And thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? If you happen to have watched Sunday night / Monday morning football, you may have noticed a couple of things. One, the Dallas Cowboys offense looks terrible. I mean, as a Cowboy fan, I have to admit, we did not look like we were clicking on all cylinders. We turned the ball over multiple times in the red zone, and as a Cowboy fan, I felt very pessimistic. But let's stop talking about the Cowboys for a second, because we talk about the Cowboys a lot on this channel, and let's discuss the team that the Cowboys beat. Barely. The Pittsburgh Steelers were in the thick of this game consistently, but there were many peculiarities that were going on as the game continued. For instance, despite the Steelers coming into the game with a 3-1 record, the announcers sound like they were paid off by Russell Wilson when they said this.
Participating in all the quarterback drills, said he felt great and he should be ready to go next week.
It's just really funny to me. It's like the Steelers are 3-1. Justin Fields has a 68% completion percentage. He's only thrown 1 interception all season long. And to be honest, given the weapons that the Steelers have, which is primarily Pat Freiermuth and George Pickins, Justin Fields has performed remarkably so far. I don't really know what Russell Wilson could bring to this team that Justin Fields can't. I mean, for instance, with 5 minutes left to go in the fourth quarter, Justin Fields threw a shovel pass to Pat Freiermuth for the go-ahead touchdown. To be honest, a Russell Wilson in his mid-30s probably can't pull this off. And it just seemed like Team 10 really reached out to the announcers ahead of time to give them this tip, because why else would they say this?
Once he's back on the field, get ready for another one of his signature catchphrases. We've heard "Go Hawks," "Let's ride" here in Pittsburgh, and maybe win the 7th.
All right.
Have no fear, Steelers fans. Russell Wilson's going to return, and guess what? This year, he's back with a brand new catchphrase.
I mean, it seems like Russell Wilson's kind of turning into the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson of the NFL, only The Rock is significantly more accomplished than Russell Wilson is, and he's doing it at probably the strangest point of his career. I mean, Russell Wilson hasn't had a successful season in quite some time, so for him to come out with new catchphrases and trying to force himself to be trendy is a little comical in my opinion. But hey, at least he's not doing this.
And the reason why this is history in the making is because this is the very first time that I have ever tried an In-N-Out burger or In-N-Out fries or anything from In-N-Out for that matter. Now, I've picked up some In-N-Out burger before through the drive-thru a few times for some buddies of mine. I've never tried it, so this is a first.
Well, that's besides the point. That's not the topic of today's video. The Steelers have a reputation of finding wide receivers that are incredibly talented. The problem is the duration of those talented wide receivers. There's no question about it. Every talented wide receiver that the Steelers have found definitely could have squeezed a little bit more juice out of their prime. A good example of this is none other than Antonio Brown, a player that wasn't supposed to be as good as he was. And I don't think that's a question in anyone's minds. Antonio Brown's story is one of the most inspirational stories ever. I mean, he was drafted with a 6th round pick, and he turned out to be one of the best wide receivers of his generation. His run with the Pittsburgh Steelers from 2011 all the way to 2018 was remarkable, but there's no question about it that he definitely had some more left in the tank. Now, whether you want to blame CTE for this, which we have a whole documentary on it, which we'll leave in the end screen because it's a very interesting insight to Antonio Brown's psyche after the hit he sustained, or if you want to blame the fact that Antonio Brown had a rough upbringing, is really up to you. But the interesting theme about this is this didn't only occur with Antonio Brown. I mean, just taking a look at the Pittsburgh Steelers history, Martavis Bryant is another player that comes to mind, who had a 765-yard receiving season in only 11 games played in 2015, was suspended in 2016, came back in 2017 and had over 600 yards receiving before the Pittsburgh Steelers traded him to the Raiders. Antonio Brown, also similar story, got traded to the Raiders once he was having issues with Ben Roethlisberger. Hell, even Le'Veon Bell, the Pittsburgh Steelers knew not to pay him and let him go to the New York Jets, where his career wasted away. But then you also look at other wide receivers like Juju Smith-Schuster, who the Pittsburgh Steelers were hoping could be the successor to Antonio Brown, and originally in 2018 it looked like he'd be the successor to Antonio Brown with his 1,400 plus yard receiving season, but unfortunately when Juju was expected to break out in 2021 after he signed a 1-year prove-it deal, he got injured, so the Steelers let him walk and he left to Kansas City. And since then, he's been a very solid wide receiver 2 or complementary wide receiver, never a standout wide receiver 1. Chase Claypool is another example of this. When he first came into the league, he looked like Maple Megatron. That's why they called him Maple Megatron, because he was 6'4" with a 240-pound body, and he ran a 4.4 40-yard dash. But unfortunately, he never seemed locked in on his games. Whether it was doing cringy TikTok dances with Juju Smith-Schuster or celebrating when the game was on the line, which eventually cost the Steelers the game. The Steelers would trade him to the Chicago Bears for a 2nd-round pick. A clip of him would go absolutely viral, not giving any effort at all whatsoever whenever he was asked to run block. And eventually the Chicago Bears would move on from him. And more recently, the Pittsburgh Steelers moved on from Deontay Johnson, who without a doubt has been the most underrated out of everyone in this group. He had a 1,100-yard plus receiving season in 2021, 882 receiving yards in 2022, 717 receiving yards in only 13 games played in 2023. Mind you, this is when Matt Canada was the offensive coordinator and eventually fired in the middle of the season with Kenny Pickett as his starting QB. And then eventually the Pittsburgh Steelers traded Deontay Johnson to the Carolina Panthers, and so far he's doing okay, I suppose. I mean, they had some QB issues, but when Andy Dalton took over, things seem to have improved a little bit. But it seems like the Steelers have found the next person that's in line to succeed all these wide receivers, and that's none other than George Pickens. Coming out of Georgia, George Pickens had a reputation of having all the talent in the world. A 6'3", 200-pound wide receiver that ran a 4.47 40-yard dash. Many scouts had him as a 1st-round pick, but he fell to the 2nd round due to character concerns. Now, that didn't scare away the Pittsburgh Steelers from taking a chance on him, and ultimately it paid off. He looked like a very solid wide receiver. In his rookie season, he had over 800 yards receiving, and his sophomore season, he had over 1,100 yards receiving. And he was expected to break out even further this past year because the Steelers traded away Deontay Johnson, and they got him a brand new quarterback, whether that's in the form of Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. And so far, George Pickens has had a pretty solid year. I mean, against the Indianapolis Colts, he was targeted 11 times, came down with 7 receptions for 113 receiving yards, but he has yet to score a touchdown so far this year. But he's on track for another career season. So far, he has 310 receiving yards, no touchdowns, 23 receptions, and was targeted 36 times. So you can imagine a lot of fans being surprised when he quite literally had a meltdown on national TV. I mean, George Pickens went absolutely viral for his face tape, where he claimed that he was always open, which was kind of ironic because he was targeted 7 times and only came down with 3 receptions for 26 receiving yards in a game that I actually expected him to dominate. You guys know I'm a diehard Dallas Cowboy fan, but I don't think I'm that delusional whenever it comes to analyzing my team on YouTube. Now, on X, it might be a bit of a different story, but I fully expected the Steelers to dominate the Cowboys in this game. The Cowboys defense was battered up. The Cowboys defense still doesn't have a rhythm. They struggled against the run, and Jordan Lewis was on George Pickens for the majority of the night. But here's the thing, Mike Tomlin had George Pickens only run a career low 20 routes last night. Now, whether that was planned or was as a result of George Pickens just not giving a lot of effort on his routes is up for you guys to interpret. But these clips that I'm showing you are very reminiscent of the situation that the Chicago Bears had with Chase Claypool. A perceived lack of effort, which obviously makes things very difficult if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. This team has no weapons, with all due respect, apart from George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth. And of course, the fact that Justin Fields is a dual threat QB. Throughout the game, if you were watching this game, you were 100% confident that this was a game that the Cowboys were destined to lose. With all due respect, when your defense is able to force 3 turnovers, including a blocked field goal and multiple turnovers in the red zone, there's no question that you're supposed to win that game. That's why I was so confident that the Cowboys were going to lose that game. This was a very winnable game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And to be honest, I don't think this loss falls on Justin Fields. I think it falls on wide receiver 1 having a complete meltdown. I mean, take a look at this one particular play in the red zone. George Pickens didn't even run a route on this play. And a lot of fans are saying it's Mike Tomlin's fault or it's Arthur Smith's fault. But to be fair, the Steelers were in the game for the entirety of the game. So afterwards, Mike Tomlin was asked about the lack of playing time for George Pickens, and this is what he said.
Wanted to kind of minimize his reps in an effort to get more productivity. You know, we just trying to rep manage in terms of the totality of the big picture. He wasn't less of a focal point in terms of our intentions of what we wanted to do offensively, but we did want to cut his reps a little bit in an effort to get higher quality play. Just in general.
And the worst part about this is that following this game, George Pickens decided to throw Jordan Lewis on the ground, which is indicative of his hot temper. And following the game, George Pickens made himself completely unavailable for interviews. According to Brooke Pryor, after ignoring interview requests post-game, Steelers wide receiver George Pickens walked through the open locker room today and sat inside the equipment room for at least 30 minutes, where he was visible but not available to be requested for interviews. So it seems like the Steelers have another version of Antonio Brown on their hands. And it's truly bizarre because Pickens is having a great year, and Pickens' final year of his contract is next season. So you would think he'd try to keep up this great track record so he could get himself paid next season. But it doesn't seem like that's the case. It's just crazy because the Steelers always find themselves in these types of situations. And sometimes it turns out to be like Antonio Brown. You get 8 good years of that player, but Antonio Brown didn't become a hothead until towards the end of his career with the Steelers, which we made a separate video that I'll leave in the end screen for you guys to check out, and I'll meet you guys there. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.